Well, okay, everybody, I can hear the beautiful sound of the carillon. So that's telling me it is 4 o'clock. I wish you guys could hear it. But I just want to welcome you all to our third club meeting. And the first one, as many of you know, was Kevin Wilson with his book, Nothing to See Here. And then the next one, we had John Reichman kind of monitor the discussion. I'm going to try to mute it. Sorry about that. I just think it'll be better. Of course, we do that. Okay, so, so John Reichman led that discussion on Joseph Conrad's The Secret Agent. So that was good. And we've recorded all of these. If you've missed them, you can go back and watch them. I post them to the Facebook, the Sewanee Book Club Facebook group. And so it's just been a lot of fun, and it's been a fun way to kind of be with you all when we can't in our traditional way. So I appreciate everybody joining us. And we are live on Facebook too. So I will be monitoring that because people can ask questions in both places. So if you are on the live Zoom and you have a question about the book, you can put it in the chat and we will get to that. And then if you're on the Facebook, I'll watch for those questions there too. But you guys, we're in for a really big treat tonight, this afternoon. We have author Leah Stewart with us. And, you know, when I'm trying to come up with these books, I just thought it was time that we had a female author, and she was the first person that came to mind. So when I reached out to her, I do know her a little bit, but still, it wasn't like, you know, I could ask for a favor, but she didn't like that at all. And she just said, I'd love to do that. And so she is an author of several books, but we specifically picked this one because it is set in Sewanee, and I thought that would be fun given that this is a Sewanee Book Club. So I hope you all have enjoyed it, and I'm going to let her just give a brief overview, and then we'll open it up for questions. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about her if you don't know her. But she had a childhood where she lived in a lot of different places. She lived in Virginia, Idaho, England, Kansas, and then back to Virginia. But then she went to high school in New Mexico. And then she went on to college at Vanderbilt, just down the road, and then graduate school at the University of Michigan. And she's lived in several places, Boston and Chapel Hill, and she has actually worked as a professor at Sewanee and at Vanderbilt and Murray State University, which is in Kentucky. But she's written several books, and she's an award-winning author. But most recently, she has been named as Sewanee's director of the Writers' Conference. And many of you may know that Wyatt Prunty had been the director for over 30 years. And so she has stepped into that role. This would have been her first summer to do that. She's at the University of Cincinnati, but she was going to be in residence here for the summer, and then all this has happened. But I still want to, as I introduce her, let her just talk about the Writers' Conference and her role. She had been involved with that in the past, but now as the director, just to talk about that a little bit before we get into the book. So I'd like to, Leah, would you mind to tell us about your role in the Writers' Conference director?
Sure. Thank you, Susan, for suggesting this, and thanks everybody for tuning in. So the Writers' Conference director is the person who determines who to invite to the conference. There's two categories of who comes to the conference, and there are those who are employed by the conference, and then are those who apply to come. And so my role was to just decide who would be the faculty, who would be the visitors, who would read the applications to determine what participants got to come. And I had a great time planning the 2020 conference and inviting all those people and anticipating what it would be like to be with them on the mountain this summer. And now we are pushing all of those plans off to 2021 and hoping we will all be able to gather on the mountain then. This would have been everybody would have just left yesterday. So this would have been or maybe Sunday. This would have been the conference the past 2 weeks. So it's been a little bit sad for me and the two associate directors the last couple weeks. But what we have been able to do is put some events online, which has been a nice way of allowing people to, like this, to have a sense of community in this time when so many of us are isolated. And it provides an opportunity for people to attend an event or take a class who might not have been on the mountain this summer, even if we had the conference. So we're going to keep doing some events throughout the year, some readings. We have Claire Massoud and Jill McCorkle and Margaret Livesey definitely reading, and some other people as well. And we'll be sending that around. I'll send it to you too, Susan, because Sewanee alums would be more than welcome to join in on some of those events if they'd like to.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. So now, thank you also for the gift of this book. I think everybody really enjoyed reading it. And so if you don't mind, just... And I'll send it to you too, Susan, because Sewanee alums would be more than welcome to join. Let's see. Okay, so if you don't mind, just the new neighbor, can you just talk about how you came about writing the book and just give us just a brief little summary, and then we'll get into some discussion.
Sure. So my maternal grandmother was a nurse, and she was in the Army during World War II. She was in the European theater. My character's trajectory when she was in the war is pretty closely modeled on my grandmother's. So that was something that I had wanted for years and years to write about. And when she was still alive, I interviewed her extensively, and she showed me the scrapbook she kept and her uniform and some other things like that. And then after she died, as my mother and brother and I were helping to clean out her house, my brother found a box of letters that she had written home to her own parents when she was overseas. So I had that resource as well. And I kept trying to shape this into a novel, but I couldn't quite figure it out, I think for a couple of reasons, one of which was that the character was very much in my head, my grandmother. And so I found it difficult to really shape a story out of it, because in order to shape a story, you usually have to allow yourself to deviate from life. And in addition to that, you usually have to allow yourself to have the characters do something bad. Unfortunately, it's fairly hard to generate a plot without some sort of poor choice on the part of your characters at some point. And I was finding that difficult to do when the character was more like my grandmother. So I ended up putting the novel aside, and I think I wrote 2 or 3 others in the meantime, because I tried to write this after my first novel. So yeah, I wrote 3 others in the meantime. And then I had this other idea to write a novel about a woman who was fleeing from her past and who might or might not have committed a crime. And it occurred to me at some point, 2 things occurred to me. One was maybe I could go back to the World War II novel if I made the character contemporary, but looking forward. Because one of the other things I was dealing with was how to really enter the mindset of somebody who was, 23 years old in 1945. And I thought, well, if it's someone who's looking back from now, then she doesn't have to remember every detail completely precisely. Maybe that will allow me to get into that material. And then it occurred to me that I could combine these 2 book ideas into one. And that's really where the idea came from. As for why it ended up set in Sewanee, there were a couple reasons for that. One was that my other grandmother, my paternal grandmother, lived in Cliff Tops. Both my grandparents lived in Cliff Tops until their death, so I associated Sewanee with visiting grandparents. And then the other reason was that as I returned to the idea of the World War II material, but creating this 90-year-old narrator who's looking back on it, I was spending a fair amount of time with my great aunt, who, like my grandmother, was originally from Murfreesboro and had her career in California, and then came back to Murfreesboro for retirement and lives in Adams Place, a senior living community in Murfreesboro. She is a sharp-tongued, very smart woman who is now, she's born in 1922. No, is that right? Yeah, I think she's in her mid to late 90s now. I might be forgetting her the exact year she was born. And still very quick on the draw and sharp-tongued, and many of the things that I put in Margaret's mouth actually came out of my great aunt's mouth. And so I also associated Margaret with the area in that way. And then, of course, both of the characters in the book, both Margaret and Jennifer, are people who have, for different reasons, withdrawn from the world. And for me, Sewanee has always felt like a place where you kind of go up the ladder into your treehouse and pull up the ladder after you. I think that's probably because I've never lived there on a permanent basis. I've just spent long periods of time there. And so for me, it has always felt like a period of being away from the world. So I think that feeling that I associate with the place is the other reason that the book ended up set there.
Right. Well, you've answered a lot of my questions, but I thought about Margaret and how hard it would be to, it seemed like you just really could pinpoint what an elderly person's thoughts are. And, but it seems like you had some good source material to work from with that.
I did. Yes. And my great aunt, actually, after she read the book, she said to my aunt, I guess I did say some of those things. It doesn't seem very nice when you see it in print.
Oh, so I was sure to remove my gum because I knew she didn't like the checkout girl at the Piggly Wiggly that.
Right. Yeah. That was actually my grandmother, the one who was actually a World War II nurse. She hated gum chewing. I always got a lecture if I had gum in my mouth.
So everybody, if you want to, if you have a question and you want to put it in the chat, and then we can bring you on screen. I don't have to read your question because we've set this up as a meeting style, and I think that would be kind of fun. But Leah, another thing before I take any of those questions is sometimes you read books that are set with a setting in mind, but you just really called out Monteagle, Cliff Tops, the Monteagle Assembly, the Piggly Wiggly. So is that a normal thing, or do I just not read a lot?
It really depends. I mean, I've talked to other writers who will set something in a place, but don't feel any compunction about just making up details about the place. But there's something about the way my brain works where I need to get it right. So I really try to use the actual details of the place. And I think it might have something to do with the fact that having grown up military, I didn't have a strong sense of place. My friend, the writer, Holly Goddard Jones, if you've never read her work, she's an excellent, excellent writer. She writes about, she's written quite a lot, not her most recent novel, which is a post-apocalyptic dystopian road novel. Very good. But her previous work was set in a small town in Kentucky that she made up, that's based on her upbringing. And I remember that she and I exchanged work, and one of the things she said to me was that she wanted, I think it was actually an excerpt of this novel. And one of the things she said to me was that she wanted a stronger sense of place. And as I was reading her novel and really seeing the tactile detail that she put in about the landscape and the buildings and, you know, just everything, everything she wrote was just so saturated with the feeling of that place. I don't think that that is as natural and instinctive for me. The reason I always give, although who knows why, is because I grew up military, so that I didn't really attach to a place in that way as a kid. And when I was in college, one of my writing teachers pointed out to me that I almost never wrote about place, and gave me the assignment to start a story with a description of place. And ever since then, I think I have actually put extra emphasis on place. And the way I get there, again, because it's not as instinctive, is to really go to the place and look around and see what I notice. I was actually doing that this afternoon because I'm writing a novel that's set here in Cincinnati. So I was walking around downtown thinking, okay, and then the character can see this building and notice this. So yeah, there's something about the way my brain works with place where I really have to be, I need that springboard of the specific details to describe it. So I see a couple questions in the chat. Holly's name is Holly Goddard Jones. She has a collection called Girl Trouble that's really excellent. And then her novel that's set in small town Kentucky, which is a mystery, is called The Next Time, I think it's The Next Time You See Me. And then she has the post-apocalyptic dystopian novel is called The Salt Line. So I see this question. I could feel the yearning for Jennifer and her daughter to get back together, but you didn't take that route. Where do you think Jennifer goes next? Will Milo find his sister years later when they do ancestry DNA tests? Yeah, I like that idea. There's the sequel. I think I felt like why didn't I have Jennifer and her daughter manage to reconnect? I mean, I have to think about it because it was an instinct. I think that part of what this book is about for me is the push-pull between the desire to pull people closer and the desire to push them away. And I felt that ultimately Jennifer and Zoe could not overcome the second desire in their relationship to one another. But I wanted to balance that with Zoe and Margaret making a kind of connection so that they might actually stay in touch while Margaret's still alive. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily completely over for Jennifer and Zoe or Zoe and Milo. I can imagine even Jennifer relenting in a few years and reaching out to Zoe. And where do they go? They go to Hawaii. Jennifer and Milo go to Hawaii, which I think I chose again because it felt like a very far away place to go, and also because I've been there a couple times, and who doesn't want to go to Hawaii? So what was behind my decision to feature Margaret's voice and a third-person narrator? So one of the ways I think about first person versus third person, that choice, and this is something I often say to my students, is does the character want to tell her story, or are you telling it despite her? Not to spite her, but despite her, D-E-S-P-I-T-E. So I think of first person as a confession, as always being a kind of a confession of some kind, or this person really needs to tell somebody what happened to them, why they did what they did. They need to explain themselves, they need to justify themselves, they need to remember something, they need to understand something about themselves. And if that isn't behind the character, then why is it in first person? In third person, you as the author are peering into that character's mind, whether they would choose to give you access to it or not. So to me, Margaret wanted to confess, and Jennifer did not want to confess. Jennifer did not want to tell her story. So that's why I made that first person, third person choice. Putting Jennifer's voice in third person made her seem more like Margaret's prey, it seems like. Ooh, that's interesting. Do you mean, Allison, because Margaret has more agency in getting to tell her own story, so she seems to have more power?
Yes, exactly. It seemed like Margaret was really very forthcoming, and Jennifer, as we know, was reserved, and putting her in the third person put up even more of a shield for her. I don't know if that was intentional. It's just the way it seemed to me.
Yeah, I mean,
Very, very good device.
I didn't think about it in terms of prey, but I definitely had the sense that Margaret was driving the book. Again, Jennifer doesn't want any of these things to happen. Like Jennifer just wants to be left alone. Like Margaret generates the whole story pretty much, aside from the dramas that happen with Jennifer and Megan and Milo stabbing the other little child in the face with a pencil. That's not Margaret's fault.
And y'all, if you want to speak your question, if you just put in the chat, oh, I have a question, then we'll call on you, and we can do it like that. But there's a new one, Johanna. She has a question about the inspiration for Jennifer and wonder if it's not a story I happen to know. She's happy to ask it live. Well, come on, Johanna.
So, hi, everybody. I had a moment reading the book where sort of the backstory comes out, and I just kind of felt this pit in my stomach because I was like, oh no, this is inspired by this person that I know. And I had this very weird thing happen in Miami. I was meeting someone professionally, lovely woman, my age, or a little bit, probably 10 years younger than me, and it was to talk about work. We became friends, but when I met her, the very first thing she said to me was, so you probably Googled me. And I was like, no, because I'm not in the habit of just Googling people before I meet them. And so she kind of gives me this backstory that involves like a Dateline episode or a 2020 and, a dead ex-husband and her kids and her and her family being under suspicion. And I kind of had this moment of, I'm going to put the book down. I just can't do this. This is what it's going to be about. And then luckily the story was different. And just so everybody knows, I've never Googled this person because I like her. But people who I've told the story to have Googled her and then watched the Dateline and listened to podcasts and are like, you should really listen to this stuff. And I'm like, but I'm friends with her. But there's this weird sensation sometimes when I'm around her where I'm just kind of thinking, are you this nice, lovely person or are you a sociopath? And it's very, very unsettling. So I'm just curious if there was a real story from the headlines that inspired Jennifer, or if I know I loved the background that it was about your grandmother and the war, but I'm also curious about the Jennifer side and, how many people are Googling people they meet to find out if they're the, suspect in a terrible murder story.
No, but I love that. That is so crazy that you have a real life version of that. No, I've never met anyone who might have killed their husband, and there was no particular from the news story that I was thinking about. I think rather I don't even know where that idea came from. I just at some point remember having this idea, writing it in a notebook, like a woman who may or may not have killed her husband. And I don't really know. Maybe I wanted to kill my husband that day. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure exactly where that came from. But what really made it a novel was the combination of that idea and the idea of Margaret as this 90-year-old woman wrestling with her own memories and driven by this curiosity that would cause her to make trouble in Jennifer's life. Without the Margaret piece, I didn't know how to make the Jennifer piece didn't know what I was going to do with that. It was really when they came together that I figured it out. But yeah, that's not the first time that's happened to me. I've had other people say, "Oh, you based this on this actual event," and no, no, yeah. Wow, that's
Thank you.
crazy.
That's interesting.
And wow, I'm really actually super impressed that you've never Googled her.
I'd rather read your book. I'd rather do other things. I don't have time for that. So yeah, I'm not, it seems like water under the bridge. And if, I don't know, there's been lawsuits going on more recently. It's a weird situation to be in though. It's unsettling. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, I see a question about how non-Sewanee people react to the setting and references. I don't know if they have a specific reaction to things like Moneagle, the Assembly, Piggly Wiggly, those sorts of names that mean something to you all. But I do think that people, I hope, or at least it's my impression, that people do get the feeling, the atmosphere of the place, part of which is the isolation, part of which is the beauty, the natural beauty, part of which is the town gown combination, how different Sewanee and Moneagle are. I think that that's coming across to people who read it, the atmosphere of the place. I have that impression anyway. It's funny, my aunt now lives in Cliff Tops, and she told me that she's been in several conversations where people try to figure out, people assume that I based Margaret on someone, and they try to figure out someone who lives in Sewanee, and they try to figure out who it was. So I think I've provided some local gossip there without really meaning to. I did have a reaction to the book cover depicting mountains that look like the Rockies. I said, these are not what this makes no sense. This is not what this looks like. But publishers in New York do not really care. They kind of care like what the image looks like, what the image evokes, etc. For my most recent book, the paperback cover has two people in swimwear, the woman in a bikini, and they're like leaping off a cliff, and that has nothing to do with the actual novel. And again, I said to my editor, like, what is this? And she said, well, we're really going for the feel more than the literal subject matter. So, what are you going to do? But yes, I had the same thought, like those are not the right kind of mountains. Was The New Neighbor my original title? No, it was not. But weirdly, I was trying to remember yesterday what the original title was, and my mind just went blank. I'm sure I could find it in an email. But my experience with titles has been that I almost always have a title that makes it all the way almost to the publication process, and then they come to me and say, you know what, we want to change the title. And it usually has to do with marketing, like marketing has seen the title and they have some kind of objection to the title. And then you go through this long period of people bouncing titles back and forth. And I remember when my editor called me and said, we have finally got it. We have the title. We know what the title is going to be. And I thought it would be something incredibly mind-blowing. And she was like, The New Neighbor. And I thought, well, I mean, fine, but like, I don't know. I thought it was going to be something a little bit crazier than that, but I don't know that I love that title. I'm not sure if I could go back in time, I would keep that title. Like, I'm not sure it really captures the feeling of the book for me, but at the same time, I can't remember my original title at this moment. So maybe it's fine. Making Margaret in her 90s. Yes. Older people definitely have less and less of a filter, which is one of the things that can make them really interesting to talk to. And in the case of my great aunt, she didn't have that much of a filter to begin with. So you can imagine the kind of things that come out of her mouth now. Once she said to my husband, when she thought that our son was misbehaving, she said, have you ever read a parenting book? And then a little bit later in the same conversation, she said to me, I always thought that bad children whose parents didn't make them behave would be bad members of society. But Eliza, that's our daughter, says Simon does well in school. And there's a moment in the book when I think I had Margaret say this to her own grandniece, where she says, "Why don't you call me more often? I have so much money." That's something my great aunt said to me. Sometimes I tell people she does have money, and she likes to talk about who's in her will and who's out of her will. So sometimes I tell people she's like a character out of a Victorian novel in that way. If you've ever read, for instance, Middlemarch by George Eliot, you'll know what I'm talking about there. Yes, both sides to Megan and the husband's marriage. I was really interested in that because I was really interested in that because of Jennifer's own past, and that you're getting Jennifer's take on what her marriage was like and what Tommy was like. And so I liked the idea of her having one impression of a marriage, and then that impression getting complicated. Seems that Margaret has little remorse when it's clear she committed murder. On the other hand, Jennifer states that she killed Tommy when she did not. Is her guilt because of Zoe's false condemnation, or because she loved him? How does Margaret feel so bold despite her past? About Jennifer, her guilt is about a feeling that she killed him. Like, she does not think that she literally killed him. She feels like he committed suicide because of what she said to him. I mean, that's she feels like she caused it, even though she did not literally kill him. I don't think her guilt is about Zoe. I think it's about herself and her own relationship to him, which you could consider a tragic love story, or you could consider dangerous codependency, depending on how you look at things. But she'd been with him since she was very, very young and loved him really intensely. And obviously that went rather awry. But I don't think she ever stopped loving him. I just think that on top of the love, there was also a lot of frustration and resentment. Margaret, how does Margaret feel so bold despite her past? I don't know if I think that she does feel so bold despite her past. I mean, she's writing her confession. Remember, like, she's not telling it to anyone. So she's kept this secret. And I don't actually think that Margaret is a naturally withdrawn person. I think that the longer she lived with her past after having retired, without the structure of regular life and people she saw all the time. I think sometimes we think we want to be alone, and then once we're alone, we realize that we don't want to listen to our own thoughts all day long. So I think that her past actually got, and this happens with older people too, even when they don't have a terrible secret. I think her past grew larger for her after she retired and was alone a lot of the time. And that she is, I don't know that she has, how much remorse she has, because she very much blamed that man for what happened to Kay. But she's definitely haunted by those events and what happened. And I see her pursuit of Jennifer as a self pursuit, if that makes sense to you. I mean, she says, like, I'm so interested in Jennifer because I read all these mysteries and I want there to be some excitement. But without her own secret, would she have been so determined to find somebody else with a secret? I think there's a lot of projection going on there. When Milo has the memory of his last name, how does that alter Jennifer's existence on the mountain? Well, Jennifer is super paranoid that people are going to find out about this history because she wanted so badly to get away from it. I mean, it's like the story you were telling about the woman assuming that you would have Googled her. So Jennifer's just assuming that people will Google her and figure it out, you know, to a greater degree than they probably actually would. Because despite Google, despite the fact that we all know that's available, I too rarely just randomly Google somebody that I met. I mean, it's even occurred to me that like when we are accepting applications to our graduate program here at the University of Cincinnati, it often doesn't even occur to me to Google those people. And you would think that that would be something, I'm not actually sure we're allowed to do that, so it's probably good that it doesn't occur to me. But you'd think that would be something that would occur to me. I mean, these are people that I know I'm going to have to work with in a graduate program that's very competitive. So it's a funny thing, I think, that that's out there, but we don't necessarily make use of the tool all the time. But if you are anxious about people finding something out about you, then I think you're hyper aware of that. So if Milo might tell people, oh, this is my actual last name, then her mind immediately goes to, and then people will look it up, and then people will know, and I will no longer be able to escape that history. So it makes her feel like she needs to flee again.
So it looks like we have George has raised his hand. So if you have a question.
Okay.
Well, I've got a couple of questions. The relationship between Kay and Margaret, it seemed like Margaret carried this throughout her entire life and her own perspective on everybody else. And we really didn't get all the particulars of Margaret's death, because who killed her? And
Oh, who
my
killed
second
Kay?
question has to do with the beach stone. Where did it wind up?
Who are you saying? Who killed Kay?
Yeah.
She killed herself.
Okay. But
But
does
Margaret felt guilty because she was sneaking her morphine.
okay, yes, I figured that.
Yeah, and Kay, unbeknownst to her, saved it up and killed herself with an overdose.
But Margaret seemed to have carried this with her
Yes.
forever.
Yes. But again, the way I imagined Margaret is that, and I know it's harder to see this because what you experience of the character is what I gave you in the book, rather than what experiences she had outside what I gave you on the page. So the way I imagined her, I mean, I think there's a point where she says something like, believe it or not, I used to be sociable. Like I used to like to have dinner parties. So she had a robust career. She lived in Nashville. She knew a lot of people.
Yeah.
She had dinner parties. I think that, again, her life, like all of our lives pre-pandemic, had a lot of leaving the house and routine and other people. And if there's one thing that happens when you're in your normal routine, and it's a busy routine, it's you don't have as much time to think, and you don't have as much time to dwell on your past and your mistakes, your regrets, et cetera, et cetera. So again, my vision of Margaret is that she did not spend those intervening decades thinking about the events of the war all the time. But in her 90s, living alone without much human interaction, without a regular routine, without a clear purpose to every single day, she has found herself dwelling more and more on those events until she has this desire to confess, to revisit them, to really ask herself why those things happened. And I honestly think, sometimes when you write a first person character, you have them lie to themselves or lie to the reader. But I really, when Margaret says about her relationship with Kay, I really don't know what kind of love it was. I mean, for that to be honest, I don't think she knows.
James Bradford is asking in the chat that there seems to be rough parallel between Jennifer, who left a promising dance career in New York City to marry, and Sebastian, who leaves his photography profession. Marriage is complicated, he says.
Yeah, I meant for that to be a parallel, so I'm glad that came through. And I just, it's one of the things that I observe, and in marriages of people of my generation, especially academic marriages. It's very often the case that there are two competing careers, and a surprising number of academic couples, mostly without children, but sometimes even with children, will live in separate places for decades. And it's often the case that we will hire a young professor who has a spouse with a job somewhere else, and they'll try to live apart for a while, and then usually either the marriage doesn't work or one of the spouses leaves the job. It's very hard to sustain, but I've seen that as a recurring theme in at least in academic marriages, because often people meet in graduate school and it's hard to get academic jobs. So, and then sometimes in places where you can get academic jobs like Sewanee, there aren't a lot of other jobs. So I think a lot of people who get faculty jobs at Sewanee, it is something of a challenge what their spouse is going to do. Does Sebastian and Megan make it, or do they eventually divorce? Gosh, that's a good question. What do you think? I don't think I decided. What is at the core of their issues? Is it really the drinking? I think that it's really complicated. On Megan's side, yeah, it's the drinking, but why is she drinking? You know, was she going to drink anyway, or what other deep unhappiness is going on there? And part of it is definitely the conflict over whether to have a second child. That's big for them. His unhappiness with his career and living there. They have a lot of things going on. I don't know. Do you think they get divorced? I honestly never asked myself that question, I don't think. For me, I kind of let them just walk off the page. I don't necessarily think a lot about what happens to him after that.
Oh, this is Tanya. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Honestly, I think they are like a lot of couples. They are starting to, like, they find joy in things and not each other.
Yes.
And so they're growing apart. And especially in Sewanee, there aren't a lot of intervening things that can happen. Like a good crisis could really bring them back together. But I don't know. I'm afraid they just drift apart and they keep doing the same thing and get farther and farther until they're just strangers to each other. So I'm afraid they don't make it.
Yeah, you're probably right. I can see him deciding to move away and Megan, their child staying there.
Mm-hmm.
I see that Ginger has a thought that she'd like to share, so I'm going to unmute Ginger.
I'm unmuted.
Okay.
So Leah, like you, I moved around all over the place growing up, and then when I got married. And so when you are the new girl, the new neighbor, you get to come to a place and kind of reinvent yourself. And everyone else who's been there, they get to know you, but they only get to know how much you share with them.
Right.
And as you're there longer, you share more. But that's how I was thinking about that. The new neighbor actually may be a perfect title for this.
Maybe so. Yeah, I think that was definitely in my mind in terms of Jennifer's sense that if she just goes somewhere else, she can reinvent herself. And obviously when we were young, it was a lot easier because no one could Google you. But it is still possible.
I feel like this is the not best group to tell this, but my friend was a professor and her ex-husband was a professor at the same school. So there's also that weird dynamic. But anyway, Google it.
Same
Try to
friend you
figure
were
it out.
talking about?
It's a mystery. Yes. Yeah.
Allison, yes, that's exactly where it is. Yeah, it's that pond.
I wondered, because it just reminded me so much of that. It's not big, it's not small, it's just kind of the right size to wave across the lake. I used to, a Sewanee friend's parents had a house there. He passed away 20 years ago, but I used to go up there a lot in the 80s and 90s. And that's just kind of, from your description past the airport, I was going, I wonder if she knows about that.
Yeah. So Kevin Wilson and his wife, Leanne Couch, are really good friends of mine, and they used to live on the pond. So their old house is what I was picturing for Jennifer's house. And then for Margaret's house, I took my grandparents' house in Cliff Tops and moved it over there.
Gotcha.
Again, like I'm not very good at imagining places. I kind of have to take an actual place, and obviously I can make some changes, like move the house from Cliff Tops to that pond, but I need something literal to picture.
Yeah, and it was easy for me to visualize. Yeah, I didn't recognize the houses, but I thought I recognized the pond. Thank you.
Yep. You're the first person to say that.
Oh, really?
That's a, I mean, obviously Kevin and Leanne knew it was that pond.
Sure.
I'm going to jump in since there's not a question hanging right now, but so it's obviously a mystery, and she loved reading those mystery novels. So do you think she was just kind of a snoopy person, or what made her want to find out every detail about Jennifer?
The mystery novels are there to give her an excuse. So yeah, I mean, I had fun thinking about what mystery novels she would read. And at one point we thought about calling it The Mystery Reader. I remember that as one of the titles we talked about. But again, I think it's a combination of her loneliness and her desire to look at her own secret without really quite wanting to do it. And so she projects that onto Jennifer, and which I think what she really wants, besides that compulsion to confess, she wants a friend. You know, she wants to connect with somebody, and she goes about it as unfortunately people sometimes do, in a problematic way. So I think it gives her something to think about, something to focus on, a way to learn about someone else, and a way to investigate herself. But for her, the mystery novels are like an explanation for why she's doing this. They're not really the reason. This book is a bit dark. How do you get yourself in and out of that space personally while you're in the writing process? I don't carry the emotions of the book, of whatever I'm writing, with me outside of the writing. So the issue for me is the other way, how to get myself in the emotional space of the book. And sometimes I will read over what I've written to that point to sort of get back in the characters' heads. Sometimes I will look at another book that for me has a similar atmosphere, a similar emotional content. Sometimes if I'm writing a sad scene, I will literally watch like a tear-jerking clip from a movie that I liked to put myself in that mood. Sometimes if I'm just having trouble entering that space, I will just go for a walk. I will pose myself a question like, okay, how are you going to do this scene? Then I'll go for a walk and deliberately not think about it. And sometimes the subconscious will take you there. They've actually done studies about the relationship between walking and the creative process. So far from the only person to say that. And then actually the other night, so I listened to this, I've got this meditation app, Calm, which I think a lot of us could probably use right now. And every night I listen to this little like daily calm. And the other night it was about using meditation to enter what the woman was calling a space of flow, which is often a word that writers or other artists will use for that experience of the artistic process where you're just really in the moment and it's coming well. And I thought, it has never occurred to me to try, when I was having a little trouble getting into a scene, to try to like clear my mind and meditate and see what came to me. So I tried it this morning and it worked. So there's my tip for today. Once Jennifer decided not to listen to the rest of Margaret's story, which presumably would lead to Margaret's confession of murder, did that necessitate Margaret's bringing Zoe in to entice or compel Jennifer to make her own confession? Yes. I mean, I think that, I don't think Margaret was saying consciously to herself, if I bring Zoe here, then Jennifer will confess. I think it was a little more indirect than that, in that Jennifer had withdrawn from her. So if what Margaret wanted was some kind of connection to another person, then Jennifer had cut that off. So contacting Zoe was a way to keep it going. I mean, Margaret behaves pretty badly. Again, remember what I was saying at the beginning about how, unfortunately, to make stories happen, your characters often have to behave badly. I saw a writer named Victor Laval tweeting today that he'd reached the point in revision where he had to take his beloved character and make her do bad things when he wanted her to make all the good choices because he loved her. But unfortunately, that doesn't lead to much of a story. So yeah, it's Jennifer cutting her off that causes her to do that, you know.
Well, any more questions? If not, I'm going to ask Leah, how can people, can you tell them if you're working on a book lately, or how can people find out news about you? Do you blog or have a website or anything?
I do have a website, although I really badly need to update it. But yeah, I have a website, and then I'm on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook anymore, so those are the main things. But we do have a Sewanee Writers Conference Facebook, where we post various things about our own doings as well as what's going on with the conference. I am working on another book, but I don't know when I'm going to finish it. So I'm about 200 pages in. Coming along, but we'll see.
Do you write in the mornings or at night, or do you schedule blocks of time? How do you do it?
I mostly write, I would say, like, I'm more likely to write in the morning into early afternoon, but it depends. In my normal life, when I'm working, I try to set aside one day a week. And then also in my normal life, I usually go away twice a year for like a week each time. I used to come to Sewanee. In fact, there used to be a writer's colony there for a few years called Rivendell, where I would go. And then I try to write all the time when I'm there, because it's a rare opportunity to do that. Right now, I'm trying to, which is again another way of contacting the unconscious, you could say. I'm trying to look at what I'm working on right before bed, and then look at it again first thing in the morning while my mind is still clear, before I look at all the emails and the news and everything. Who are some of my favorite authors? Who would I really, really like to get to the writers' conference? So some of the people that I really wanted to get were supposed to come, like Claire Massoud I really wanted to get. She's going to come. Sarah Swenyan-Bynum, Jess Walter, they were all going to come. Who are some of the people I'd really like to get? I'd like to get Minjin Lee to come. I actually asked her, but she was working on, she had a book deadline. She came to the conference years ago as a participant, so she has fond memories of it. Some other people, I'm trying to think who else I asked who turned me down. Andrew Sean Greer, who wrote Less, which is a very, very funny book that I like a lot. I love Margaret Atwood, but you wouldn't get her to the Sewanee Writers Conference. Who else? It'd be great to get Colson Whitehead, but I think we've probably, we could have gotten him maybe 10 years ago, but probably couldn't get him now. I don't know, there's such a long list. The story collection I really like by a woman named Danielle Evans, and she, I think, has a novel coming out now, or at least another book. So she's somebody I might like to get down the line. Yeah. If we did sci-fi, I would ask N.K. Jemisin because I really like her books, but that would be a big change for the conference, which has never brought in like sci-fi fantasy writers before. Maybe it would be fun to do that. Oh, we have one more question about the book. The stone, lost things make me uncomfortable. I know, I hate lost things too. I keep searching my house for a piece of jewelry that I lost like 1.5 years ago. Does Margaret ever give Zoe back her stone? Gosh, I don't know. I'd like to think so. I don't know how she would give it to her. Maybe she'd slip it in her bag and say nothing about it. I don't know that she'd want to confess, I stole this from your mother's house. She'd probably want Zoe to think better of her than that. Maybe she would slip it to her. Or leave it.
Or maybe accidentally.
Yeah.
When Zoe's visiting, sometimes she sees the stone and gets it back.
Takes it. Yeah. 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 Let's say that. Then we can
Okay.
feel better about her getting it back.
Feel much better. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been so fun, and we're wrapping up into our hour's time. But Leah, we just thank you for your generosity of being here. You've just been delightful and so charming, and we've loved spending this time with you all. So,
well, thank you all for reading. I appreciate the good questions. And hi, Julie. I see Julie, who was in my class when I taught at Sewanee.
she mentioned that.
Yeah.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing well.
Good.
Great. Well, all right. I'll send some news about the next next book that we'll get together with. But anyway, thank you all so much for being here, and have a great week.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Leah.
Bye.